Excuse me if my voice is a little bit raspy. I had some kind of a cold, flu, and/or COVID variant that I just got over. So bear with me if my voice is not quite back to snuff. Today's session is going to be a little bit of a step away from what we've been talking a lot about lately, which has been on the apocalyptic, what's going to happen next side of the soul game, and is going to really focus in on, well, okay, yeah, that's all well and good, but what if I'm going to have to live for another 50, 60, 80 years, or my kids are, in this growing dystopia that we've got all around us? Is there any hope for them? Okay, and I'm going to title this segment The United Nations of Buffer States. What I'm going to do today is to describe a potential solution to the problems that we have at hand. A solution that I think makes a lot of sense from an Omnist philosophical point of view, and could be something that actually could be implemented if there was enough weight behind it. Okay, first of all, I want to remind you that one of the core principles of Omnism is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is why no good God would want to be the authoritarian micromanager of the universe. Such an all-powerful being would be a tyrant, by definition, because souls are not all good. There is no one, anywhere, any place that is all good. We all have our dark side, so does God. It's the nature of the beast. You can't kill your ego. You can pretend you've killed it, and all that does is subsume the dark side, hides it within you, so you can go around chanting love, peace, happiness. Sorry, you're lying to yourself. God doesn't lie to himself. Well, not anymore. At any rate, it's based on that philosophy. And why United Nations and why buffer states? Okay, first off, let's talk about what the United Nations are. Most of you are familiar with the UN. Many aren't aware that the UN is at least the second of many attempts at making a sort of a world government. Some of these attempts were completely hidden from history because they were basically done as kind of an good old boy agreement in back rooms of the states that considered themselves the major players in what they called the Great Game in the Victorian Age, the game of geopolitics, which has been going on for quite some time, not only under the aegis of the Western powers, but absolutely involving Eastern powers like China and the major empires of the Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic world. Although they would all like to say that everything's the fault of the West. We never did anything wrong. Nothing was ever a problem until, big bad Columbus and Magellan and everybody came and took over our land and enslaved our people. Sorry. This is a cultural Marxist diatribe that's very popular among some people, and it's just complete bullshit. The power game has been going on for a long time, and anybody who has been anybody that had power has been involved in it and has used their power to try to get more power and influence, even if their core intent was peaceful. The United Nations today Well, let's take a look at the difference between the League of Nations and the United Nations. The League of Nations was set up upon pretty egalitarian principles as sort of an ultimate democracy of states. It failed miserably because everybody sat around in D.C. arguing, and the only states that had the power to actually do anything would just sit down and refuse to go by any of the dictates of the other countries involved. And so the League of Nations accomplished nothing. Finally, everybody said this isn't worth investing in, and took their delegations home and put them to work doing other things. The UN was set up a little differently. If you know anything about the UN, you know that there's basically two main components of the UN. Security Council, and there's the General Assembly. And since then, there have been all these little adjuncts to the UN focused on solving this little problem, the WHO, the World Bank, all of these little offshoots of the UN that are supposed to solve specific problems. And to this extent, what the UN looks like at this point is a lot like the United States deep state, where you've got basically the trappings of a democratic government, a republic of states, hiding the fact that you've basically got a bureaucracy of large organizations that run everything, make all the decisions, pretty much behind closed doors, and then just have a PR arm to sell it to the world as we're saving your lives. And there's never been more apparent than in the pandemic era with what the WHO has done. And these, just a second, I ought to let my wife in. I locked the door telling him I couldn't be disturbed, but she doesn't listen to me, ever. Okay, darling. What's the guy gonna do? At any rate, the UN is a completely dysfunctional organization at this point. Everybody knows that. And the ones that are profiteering from it love it, because it's easier to make money through graft and corruption with the UN than it is through the U.S. government. Now, it's not quite as easy as it is if you are part of the Communist Party. Thugs built on corruption, basically ruled by the new proclaimed dictators of the Chinese mafia, which has been a very, very active organization throughout the world for quite some time. If you know anything about mafia organizations, they make the Chinese tongs make the Sicilian mob look like Boy Scouts, frankly. And these are the folks that are strong-arming their way to get what they want in the UN, and throwing out dictates about what the world should do, how we should behave, and blah, 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 steering us towards the authoritarian, totalitarian state they would like to make the world. And the main real conflict going on is who is going to be the godfathers and godmothers of this state, who gets to sit in the top chairs and wag everybody else's tails. Okay, so that's what the UN is, and everybody who is at all sane right now, at all savvy, knows that the UN is not working. It represents a brand of globalism that is far worse than the old era of nation states and national corporations. Now we've got globalist states like the UN and international monopolies, cartels, corporate mafias, essentially. That's how they work. That's how they maintain their power. That's how they keep competition from stealing their business. You have only to look at what they did to some of the tech companies that were allowing people a platform when they were being denied by Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. They killed Parler with their power. Now, that is pure evil. This is a manifestation of the anti-God Borg that I talk about, the worshiper of absolute power, who is the absolute power of absolute powers, because Borg works through mind control. Borg can make you think that you're absolutely happy. It's the ultimate Orwellian utopia when you're under Borg's control. Everything looks rosy-colored and perfect. And there's some people that like to live in a place like that, but that's not God's universe. Okay, so what are buffer states? If you look throughout history, one common feature you will find in all eras is the idea of a buffer state. Back in the old days of the first Chinese Empire and the Mauryan Empire in India, there were buffer states between these in Southeast Asia that were more or less independent, occasionally got conquered by one or the other, but by a particularly belligerent emperor, but more or less maintained their autonomy and served as a buffer zone between them. Same thing with the Romans and the Persians, the Parthians. That was a buffer state situation. The Romans didn't have a buffer state to speak of on their German front. And the result of that was there were much more frequent incursions on both sides there. And this is an example of why buffer states can be useful if they're made to work successfully. Now let's talk about what a buffer state could mean in the globalist era. Now in the globalist era, boundaries don't mean as much as they used to. It's really a question of influence and power that matters. And now we've got the extra additional problem of having corporations themselves, which are sort of like stateless nations that have gotten so powerful, so big, so influential, that they need to really be treated like independent powers and be limited in ways that are like independent powers. There need to be buffer states between corporations to protect them from each other. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, that's what we need one world government for, so the one big government can protect everybody from all the bad guys. Well, like I said, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. One big government is not the answer. You need to distribute power. How do you do it? Well, you can't just force everybody to have the same power, because people who want power are going to try to grab it. What you can do is let the buffer states have a lot of power. Okay, so what I envision as a United Nations of buffer states, take the United Nations we have now. Okay, let's take out any of the member states that have a history of aggression, that have ever started a war in the last 100 years, that have ever had an insurrection or revolution or caused an insurrection or revolution in another country, and say, sorry, you're not a member of the United Nations of buffer states anymore. And by the way, the United Nations of buffer states also includes corporations. So if you are one of the corporations that has exhibited monopolistic power or cartel action in the last 100 years, I'm sorry, you're not welcome to participate. You don't get to get a seat at the table until you behave like somebody that cares about the whole world and not just your own bottom line. So this United Nations could be a real counter to the real powers. It would have all the folks that just want to get on with their country's life, that just want to be moderately successful with the country that they love, the land that they would fight to defend. The corporations that have a lot of confidence in their own product, so much confidence that they're willing to slog it out in a competitive market with anybody as long as the playing field is level and they're not being pounded down by some monopolistic assholes like Bezos or Gates or Zuckerberg, or this goes on and on. Those people are evil. They built their empires to pursuit of power without any concern for who they stepped on while they got there. Okay, so could this work? Well, this is the other thing about Omnism. Omnism is a philosophy and a religion that is built upon understanding the science of creation. Nothing gets created that's perfect the first time. You can idealize any system. You can think it out to the nth detail, and until you actually put it in practice, you're not going to find out where all the bugs are. In fact, you won't even find a small fraction of the bugs. Ask any software developer or hardware developer, which I've been involved in both, so I know. If you want to get something done right, you create a prototype. You do simulations on a prototype circuit. You do all of this stuff before you ever put anything into production. When you're doing software, you're developing a new game. Okay, you're going to want to have the game online and have millions of users. You don't immediately go to millions of users when you turn it on. You have a pilot group. First you do internal testing, then you roll it out to a wider audience. Okay? And this is how governments evolve. Could evolve if they were done scientifically. Now, many of the governments of countries today have been thought out fairly scientifically and with an understanding of human nature and at least a basic understanding of the laws of God. Some basic idea that there is some force, some power that'll get you if you do something wrong eventually. Karma, divine retribution, whatever it is. There's a sense that you should be humble enough to be afraid of the hereafter if you haven't been the best person you could be. And anyone who does not have that fear is going to rationalize doing anything they damn well please to get what they want. And this is exactly what is going on with some of the political parties today. Some of the highly issue-oriented political people who are so augured in on one particular issue, one particular thing that is their win, they would do anything to get what they want. Lie, cheat, steal, etc., etc., etc. And this isn't just rich people. There are poor people that will do that too. And this is how you get communist revolution. You find a bunch of poor people, you get a leader that has ties to money and mafia, and you put those three together and it will burn a nation to the ground and rebuild a new one in its evil image, which is exactly what happened in China. And maybe someday we'll do a complete segment just on the history of the Communist Party, which is a pretty sad story of abuse of people. It's like take everything that was the worst that ever happened in any dynasty before the CCP and put it all in place to happen in 100 years, and that's what you got. And, it's karma that the people didn't do anything about it. The ones that were bright got away. Instead of fighting, they realized after Tiananmen Square, well, you know what? I don't think this is a battle worth fighting. I can't deal with this anymore. Let's get the family out of Dodge. They moved overseas if they could, if they were wealthy enough. Tried to get to Hong Kong or Australia, Canada, United States, and sit this one out. And you've got the same thing happening in the United States now with this growing number of people saying, well, there's no hope of doing anything to fix what's going on in the United States. We just need to, go to a free state haven and stock up on our ammunition and our food and move out to the boonies and defend everything to the last round of ammunition we have. And this is a cop-out. If you want to make a change, you've got to be willing to oppose tyranny to the limits of your life. And yes, this is what being a martyr is really all about. The real martyrs of history were those that opposed tyranny, not those who adamantly defended, no, my God is better than your God, I'll die for it. That's not opposing tyranny, that's trying to assert tyranny. If you don't know the difference between those two things, I guarantee that you're not going to a very good heaven. You've got a lot to learn about being a human. You've got a lot to learn about being a soul. The game of souls that God set up, the first creator set up, is not about who gets the most worshipers, who bows down the best before God. That's not God. That's Borg. That's one of the anti-gods that thinks Borg got it right. That absolute power is the solution to government of souls. It ain't so. It has its uses. And that's why the whole thing was set up that way, because some souls do gravitate to wanting to be told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And those are the souls that end up inhabiting the things in the multiverse that have very, very fixed rules they operate under. Okay? The souls, the oversouls that run a star are largely of that variety. They don't get to say, well, I think I'm going to change my orbit today to go this way. I'm going to change my momentum and velocity to head out this way because I'm tired of being so close to the Milky Way. They don't get to make those decisions. They used to, back in the old days when everything was being set up and the rules were being sorted out. Now the rules are pretty well fixed for many things. And if you want to be the oversoul of a planet, the oversoul of the sun, well, you can call yourself a god of sorts, but you're a pretty pathetic god, because you're a god of a collective that has its fate already pretty well decided. You're going to be a god managing a very boring eternity. This is the truth that you yourself would find out. You could suss it out any which way you look at it if you have any respect for the laws of science and how those laws could manifest themselves in a spiritual world as part of a co-creation. Laws are still being discovered every day. This is kind of the essence of quantum mechanics. You got to observe things enough times from enough points of view to sort out which point of view seems like the one that ought to be law. It's like you could view every experimental scientist as a cop holding a speed checker, one of those little speed guns. And they're all on every corner, every different place that new particle might be able to go by, checking the speed of the particle, checking its characteristics, and if enough of them agree, the particle exists. As long as there are big disagreements, then they talk it over, they work out what the differences in their experiments are, what possible corollaries of previous laws they might have missed out that might explain the discrepancy between their results. And this is how real science works. Theory doesn't become a law until it's like you've checked so many other ways of explaining all of the data, not just some of the data. You don't just get to pick and choose look at this. This proves blah. This is how idiots conduct science. And yes, most politically charged people are idiots when it comes to science. They don't give a flying fuck about science or the scientific method. They'll find one isolated fact, one set of circumstances, one incident, and point to that and say, this proves I'm right. End of story. And that's why we have people at their throats over every possible issue, which is complicated. This is not scientific. This is why we have corporate science that's completely unscientific, because when push comes to shove, the narrative that improves their bottom line is the one that gets approved by the management chain and is shown to top management as what they're going to use to predict their next quarter's earnings. And to that extent, the big corporations work exactly like a communist party. If you look at how the Chinese Communist Party works in detail, yes, there are people who have a little power at every level, but they know that they have to adhere to the dictates of the big poobah at the top, or the poobahs, the Politburo, if there's not one person in all the main jobs that has more power than the others, which happens under weaker leaders like Hu Jintao. With somebody like Xi Jinping, you're going to get stepped on if you don't follow their policy. Zero COVID policy. Shut down the whole country if we have to, because we got a zero COVID policy. Destroy the economy. Destroy small business. This is how authoritarian regimes work. The guy at the top does not have all the information. Cannot possibly have it, and if it's all to please the guy at the top, and nobody has any individual real power along the way, what happens is they kowtow to the guy at the top, and they figure, well, he's getting everything he wants. All I have to do is do whatever I can to get what I want, and just hide everything from the guy above. And this is what goes on in corporations, what goes on in communist parties. At any level of the uniparty, the folks in charge of that little group or organization will create a fantasy world that benefits them. And this is exactly how big corporations work. I know I worked in them for many years. To the extent that those fantasy worlds become realer than the real world, you have these big corporations that basically implode, because there are so many versions of reality that are so different from what's at the top that when it's time to sort of reconcile them all and put out a quarterly report, you can't make any fucking sense out of it. And this is what happens every time The CCP has to come up with new GDP numbers, new growth numbers, new. Everything is fucking made up. And anybody, I mean, you can go look at any China analyst that is worth their salt and is actually working on telling the truth about China, and they would tell you that their numbers, the official numbers, are absolutely worthless. The only numbers you can actually rely on are what you can get from their effect on other countries, international trade numbers. Well, you know that the volume of trade going into China was this much, and the volume of stuff coming out of China was this much. And you can pretty much equate that to how well the Chinese economy is doing, even though you may not know much about what's going on inside. You can find out from looking at the statements of companies that operate outside China, that manufacture in China, and get some idea of, from their numbers, what actually is going on in China based upon industry trends. Anyway, what we need is a universal United Nations of buffer states, of people who don't want anyone to have absolute power, and will join together in making sure no one gets to exert a monopoly over the land mass of our world, over the resources of our world, over the minds of our world, okay, over technology, over anything. Unfair monopolies, if allowed to grow unchecked, will produce very, very dystopian systems, Orwellian systems. More power that gets concentrated, and we're talking about concentrating power on a global scale. You're talking about peak Orwellianism, at least in regards to one species and one planet. That's not a good place to be. That's not going to be a place that humanity will survive very long. It makes for a very, very brittle culture. And we've seen that in spades with what's going on with the pandemic. And now the Great Reset. This global supply chain that they set up, telling us it was so wonderful to manufacture in China and, you know, ship all the resources to China, manufacture there, send them back here, send them there, send them there. This is completely dystopian. We need to move production closer to where consumption is. We need to build economies that are sustainable in the face of any global disaster, whether it's natural, quote, or artificial. From the Omnist point of view, everything is natural because we are all part of the huge nature that is called the multiverse, which includes physical universes, spiritual universes, and all of the connections between them. So we're really citizens of this larger. I hate to call it a collective because I don't want to count out to the idiocy of these folks who think of their things in terms, oh, we're all one. No, we're not all one. We're all individuals. We are part of a collective, though, that has connections between each other and affects each other. Like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. You can poke him here, and unlike a marshmallow, where you poke has an effect somewhere else. You just don't see it. And this is the nature of the multidimensionality of the multiverse, that things we do in one place can have huge effects elsewhere. That's what makes this species so special. That's what makes this silly planet, Earth, such a special place. And there are other special places that other gods are performing experiments, doing things that they are jazzed about doing, that may be just as special places in the future. They're not right now. The place where it's really happening is here right here, right now. Because if you're listening to me, you're in one of two special universes. If you're physically incarnated and listening to me, I should say. If you're listening to me through channeling or spiritual connections from the spirit world or wherever, you could be listening to me from anywhere in the multiverse. But if you are hearing me live and able to follow me on YouTube and not just watching me through Crystal Ball or something like that, you are actually in one of two universes, two original universes, the universes of God and Borg. This is how creation started. This is how the experiment started, and it's always been an experiment in government. How to govern creation so it didn't fall apart, so it didn't become stagnant, so it kept expanding. And what I'm telling you today is an idea for bringing that goal to a human level. A level where, yeah, you know what, we can agree on this because it is extending the lifetime, the usable lifetime of the human species. You're not going to extend the lifetime of the human species by retreating to some nirvana, nowhere land and waiting out the dystopia that's coming. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. No matter how many guns you have, no matter how big your little enclave is, how prepared you are to fight off whatever comes, you're not going to survive. And that's what's going to happen in Borg form. Because the whole point of humanity was to develop a species to test and perfect karma. The only version of Earth, the only version of humanity that needs to go on is the version that's in God's universe. That's the one that needs to spread the word of karma elsewhere. It needs to let people know what they really need to know to live a truly good life, a truly godly life. A life that is about serving creation, not serving God, serving creation in your own individual way, to the best of your abilities, in each and every incarnation, learning how to do it better, trying out new skills, trying out new talents. But you're only going to get to be there if you work on it with the folks in the universe you're in. And I don't know if you're in the same one as me, because this broadcast is going to both of these special universes. That's why they're like tied at the hip. They always were, as long as this experiment was going. And it's only when this experiment is finished that, okay, we've tested karma, now we're going to turn it on and roll it out and start distributing it to the rest of the multiverse. At that point, the umbilical cord between God's and Borg's universe is going to be severed. And all of the other Earths in all of the other universes are going to go their merry way. Some of them are going to destroy their humanity. Some of them are going to destroy their Earth. Some the Earth is going to be destroyed by some third party, some alien species that think they have it all figured out when they don't even know that they aren't in the only universe in the multiverse. And yes, there are some species out there that have very high technology and are so stupid they haven't even detected that they actually live in a multiverse and not just one universe. The multiverse can't really be understood unless you understand the spiritual roots of creation. All of the scientists that are poking and prodding from a materialist science point of view, completely sure that there is no God, everything is just random processes that happen this way because it's either deterministically set that it's going to happen that way, or it's probabilistically happening this way or this way because of... I'm sorry. You're never going to get very, very far with science if you do that. Science is a spiritual pursuit. It always was. The laws have come into being because of creation, because of gods, because of the first creator who thought up the idea of, wow, let's let everybody work together to figure out what laws work best for all of us. Not only in the physical realm, in the spiritual realm. Karma is a spiritual law. No different from the law of the speed of light. The laws that govern interactions between particles, interactions between molecules. All of science is just part of metaphysics. Metaphysics is a good word to add to your vocabulary. Metaphysics means all of physics, not just what can be seen, not just what's been observed yet, but what is the totality of the laws that govern creation. And they are changing, they are evolving. DNA is not the only tool for evolution. Everything evolves, some more slowly than others. It's took a long time to evolve the properties in detail of the elements, particles, molecules. It took a long time to evolve how stars work, when they stop producing hydrogen and switch over to producing heavier elements, when they go supernova, what happens to them at different points, and we're still discovering new types of stars. Maybe we will forever, because creation is not only about making things that work, making things that are beautiful, that are unusual, that are rare, that make people look up and say, wow, there must be a God. You have allowed something so beautiful to happen. And this is essentially the decision everyone has before them. You have a decision whether you're going to finish this end of the day 7 of creation on the Lord's side or the God side. And that's why I keep preaching so rigorously against tyranny. I keep encouraging people not to stick their heads under a rock and pretend it's not there, pretend it'll go away, pretend that, oh, some savior's going to come, or if only our side wins, then we'll have a better tyranny than what we have now. This is insane. This is idiotic. It's not worthy of a human brain. Not worthy of a human incarnated soul. And that's why, if you think along those lines, you're not going to get a chance to be human again. And it's not going to be anybody's fault but yours. At any rate, I hope you like that idea. I'm sure it's not perfect. There's a lot of details in implementation. How would we do this? How would we convert the United Nations into a United Nations of buffer states and corporations? Well, you'd be surprised how many people, how many corporations, and how many nations aren't part of the good old boy club that actually make all the decisions. lot of them are having the nerve to stand up to the big boys, to stand up to the U.S., to stand up to China, to stand up to Russia, to stand up to the U.K. All of the old players at the game, you know who you are. And the new players to the game, we know who they are. The ones that think they're powerful enough to step on their neighbors and force them into compliance. Ja, gut, mein Herr. The German will not be Nazis anymore, will we? EC members. EU good, as long as we control all your money. They're still playing the same old games in Berlin. They're still playing the same old games in Moscow. They're still trying to play the same old games in Constantinople, in Istanbul, for God's sake. That's how old this game is. That's how set the players are on the idea that they're still relevant, and they should be relevant, and if only the world could come to see things their way, it would be perfect. And this is what's behind militant Christianity, behind militant Islam, behind militant communism, militant orthodoxy, militant commercialism, are all basically players in this great game that want to be the master of the world, be the mafia that wags everybody else's tails while you go off and play and do whatever you want with your bodyguards and isolation from any cameras or anything, so you can get up to whatever nonsense you want to while pulling the strings that keep you in power. This is what the real powers of the world have always been, hiding in the shadows, not the Hitlers of the world, the ones behind the Hitlers, the ones that thought they could control the Hitlers. And then, oh boy, we created a monster. He's not as easily manipulated or as easily disposed of as we thought. And if you look at the history of that era, you would know that there were many attempts to assassinate Hitler long before the end of the war. In fact, many attempts that were orchestrated by elite powers who realized, wow, this guy has become dangerous. He's not going to be the useful bringer of a new world order that we thought he was going to be. The same with the ones that took down Lenin and Trotsky after supporting them, thinking that communist Russia would be the great harbinger of a new world order. Same ones that are taking down the United States now, especially after getting a taste of Donald Trump, who absolutely bucked the programming that he was supposed to follow when he was elected. I'm not saying he's such a wonderful guy. A lot of what he did was kind of stupid, but at least he realized it was being played. Which is, well, I don't know, maybe Obama was willfully played, part of the system. There is definite indication that he had very heavy ties to the CIA. The CIA has heavy ties to foreign powers. The CIA was infiltrated almost from its beginning by, well, let's say folks that wanted the war to go in a certain way. World War II to end in a certain way that set up Asia to be the next big winner, despite the big loss of Japan. A lot of the narratives, psychological narratives that have come to the fore since the era of the CIA and their involvement in the entertainment industry and information wars indicates that they are largely infiltrated by the same folks that are driving communist China before, that are driving Eastern philosophy to the front, that are driving this narrative of oneness, one world government, one leader, one almighty God, a better God this time because it's all of us. We're all God. Oh, wouldn't that be so wonderful? This is evil shit, because it is absolutely Borg planning. This is how Borg works. Borg creates an organization that thinks that they are the ones who control all the minds, when their minds are controlled by the next higher one, the spider in the shadows, controlling them. And because their control, their desire for power is all material, that makes them easier to control. Once you take any sense of a higher being, any respect for a God out of the equation, leaders will do anything and have done anything. That's why every communist country has been an absolute disaster for its people. Millions upon millions sent to Siberia, the labor camps, to die under the USSR. Millions upon millions taken out by the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, and now Xi Jinping's wonderful plan to turn China back into a communist dystopia after it's been so brutally raped by Western culture. It's all part of a plan. And that plan, the plan of oneness, is the plan of Borgness. If you think there is no God, or one God, or one all, one consciousness, you are serving Borg, directly or indirectly, either as an active proponent of authoritarianism, totalitarianism at a grand scale, or as a useful idiot of those who are doing that. I don't mind calling the cosmic oneness cult useful idiots. If you think that the world is going to get better by love, peace, oneness, we're all one, we just have to be nice to everybody and they'll get better, you're an idiot. You're an absolute, total, and complete fool. And you need to admit that to yourself. That's the only way anyone gets out of this cognitive dissonance alive. And if you end your life in cognitive dissonance, I guarantee that you are not going to get to stay in God's universe. You're not going to get to stay in humanity. It's not a punishment. It's what you deserve. You don't need souls that are that easily manipulated and controlled and fooled by pie-in-the-sky propaganda. Anyway, like, share, subscribe if you want to help flesh out this idea of United Nation of buffer states. Maybe you're a corporate person who has had enough of big corporations pushing you around, monopolizing your business, monopolizing your technology, forcing you in line to what their political narrative is, or face losing your IT infrastructure, losing your customers. You might be interested in participating in creating this idea of the United Nations of buffer states. If you're one of the states that, one of the countries that feels pushed around and maligned and confused and twisted by what's been going on with the pandemic, if you realize that you've wasted tons of your economy, tons of your money on useless PPE and vaccines that don't vaccinate anything. We've realized that all along there were perfectly wonderful medications that were very, very effective at treating more serious symptoms of COVID, that there were preventative measures you could have taken, vitamin D, etc., to make sure that your populace wouldn't be so vulnerable to COVID. Well, you might want to consider joining the discussion around the United Nations of buffer states, because this is the only way we're going to prevent monopolies, monopolistic nations, monopolistic corporations from doing this again, or completing the cycle of what they're doing right now, which is basically the whole idea of the Great Reset, the pandemic, is to keep people's resistance down till they're ready for anybody to step in and say, hey, folks, I'm God. We're going to control things from now on. We control the vertical. We control the horizontal. Just listen to us. We'll tell exactly what to do, and the world will be a wonderful place again. And if you disagree with us, well, let's just say you won't be disagreeing very often. Do you want that? Do you honestly want that for your kids? That's what's coming. That's what's coming in the Board universe. It's not coming in God's universe. I don't know how we're going to get to the alternate solution in God's universe. I'm just excited to be here, ready to find out. I know I'm going to find out because I've been flipping between these two universes consciously now for about 5 years. The Mandela effect is really tricky. When you see how the past and the future is going to be changing the past and the future of these two universes. Once they split apart, once that tie is severed, then creation can really flip into high gear. On both sides, believe me. On the dystopian side and on the utopian side. And the dystopias they're going to create are, well, the stuff of great novels, great dark thrillers, and you know, probably will be. Those genres are still going to be popular reading among God's people. Man, aren't you glad we didn't go down that path then? Isn't it a good thing that Hitler won and this alternate history didn't happen? Isn't it a good thing that this miracle of the Cuban Missile Crisis fell out the way it did? Other universes, it didn't happen that way. Or won't happen that way once they're separated from the requirement of these two universes staying together. They can go their merry way. And the hells can be as hellish as they want to be, and the heavens as heavenly as they want to be. Not immediately. It's going to take a lot of time, because we've only conquered, at this point, at the point that the event of Day 7 finishes, we'll only have conquered one planet. And the final victory of that conquest won't really be till every soul involved in the chosen species recycles, goes through the death experience, and has a new death experience that takes them to whatever universe and species they're now destined for. So it's going to take a little while to sort things out. And from an organizational standpoint, it's going to take a while to sort out the oversouls of our thoughts and ideas. We're not going to kill bad ideas like communism overnight. And because even though the chosen people are still going to be incarnating in our species after this is over, they're going to be learning again. They're going to have forgotten what they learned back in heaven about, well, you're lucky. You got to continue playing in God's universe in the next round. Whatever qualities you had, whatever you did, put you on a track for being one of the team that's gonna, Star Trek karma to the heavens. And that's what Day 8 is all about. Taking this new government of souls to other species, freeing them from the clutches of Borg species, sending Borg species to their reward. And yes, we will have to kill them to do that. Or get them to repent and work on not producing any more karma by basically checking out of the hive mind and starting to behave nicely, rationally towards each other with a view to, well, that wouldn't be a good thing to do because that's going to step on somebody's sovereignty, some other soul's sovereignty. If I do this, I push this button, that's going to kill a planet that God's team was working on. That wouldn't be a good thing to do. If I have really learned my lesson, I'm not going to push that button. And there will be Borg agents, Borg servants, who are going to be put in the same place as, I wish I knew the guy's name. There was this Russian soldier who, when the order came down to push the button, because it was time to start the nuclear war during the Kennedy administration, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, he said, well, I'm not going to do what I was told to in the book. I'm not just going to push the button because it's what the manual says to do next. I'm going to call my superior and insist that he get it approved by his superior. And if they have to go all the way up to Khrushchev, I want to know that I'm destroying the world because it needs to be destroyed. That's the reason why we survived. We would have been completely wiped out by nuclear proliferation right then and there. And we still could be. And we still will be, perhaps, in some of the Borg universes. It's not going to happen for me, so if you see it and you want to write about it, I'm sure that somebody will pick up the inspiration on the other side and turn it into a dystopian novel or something. But anyway, this is the way things happen. This is how time functions in the multiverse. This is how it's going to play out. This is why there's so many people predicting this, predicting that. Dystopia, utopia, blah, 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 blah. Apocalypse, ascension. There's a little bit of truth in all of those. And there are a lot of lies in all of them, depending on how far they are from your truth. Now, your truth may be lies, too. I can't tell you that. I can tell you that if you think there's any easy path to getting to become a god, getting to the 12th level of spiritual advancement, you've been fed a pack of lies. At any rate, it's hit about an hour now, so it's supposed to be the Omnist hour. I try to quit while I'm ahead. I just walked into the room again, too, so it needs my attention. At any rate, till the next time, this is the Omnist hour.